Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me on this webinar on everything you need to know about electric vehicle charging. My name is Mal Skoran, and I'll be delivering this webinar today. It looks like some people are still trickling in, so I'll just start off by giving a brief intro to who I am. My name, again, is Mal. I'm the Program and Policy Coordinator for Green Energy Consumers Alliance. And this webinar is really intended to be a 101 style webinar. So if you're thinking about getting an electric car and the idea of charging intimidates you, or you're not quite sure where to start or what you need to know in order to make the switch to an electric vehicle, this webinar will provide you with all the information you need to be able to confidently make that decision once it's time for you to replace your current gas-powered car. So thanks again for joining me today on this rainy morning in New England. Before we get started, let's just go over some logistics. So first thing, everyone is muted to avoid background noise. But I do want to have you actively participate if you have questions or comments. And so feel free to send those in via the chat feature, which you should see on the GoToWebinar panel. And actually, as a brief practice of that, if you can hear me loud and clear, just let me know in the chat to make sure that the audio is good. And also to make sure you know how to use the chat feature. And then finally, this webinar will be recorded. And so if you need to log off early, or if you're interested in sharing this information with a friend or colleague or anyone else that you know could use this information, then that recording will be shared. So let's get started. For those of you who aren't familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we're a nonprofit organization based in Boston and Providence, and our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. One way that we help accomplish that mission is through what's called our Drive Green program. And the goal of the Drive Green program is to help accelerate electric vehicle adoption by getting them on the road in place of gas-powered cars. You might already know this or have heard of it before, but electric vehicles charged in New England can cut your per mile carbon emissions by 75%. So the environmental and climate reason to switch to an electric car is pretty compelling. And since the electrical grid in New England is getting cleaner every year, those environmental benefits will continue to grow. Electric vehicles are also a new technology. You might not know anyone who drives one currently, and you might be feeling very comfortable driving your gas-powered car. So this webinar is really meant to get you to feel comfortable with the process of charging, so that you don't have to worry about that as you make the transition. And I do want to be honest, charging an electric car is pretty different from the way that you might be used to fueling your gasoline-powered vehicle. And so in this next hour or so, we'll cover things like how charging works. So, what actually the vehicle is doing and how it's taking in energy. I'll talk about the difference between level 1 and level 2 charging. And so those refer to two different charging speeds that are commonly used by EV drivers on a daily basis. I'll talk a little bit about what it's like to install a charging unit at home and whether that's something you should have to consider as you're making your plan to switch to an electric car, or whether you'll get by just using a regular household outlet. I'll also talk a little bit about public charging networks. Those are the charging stations that you might have seen around town at a grocery store or in a public parking lot at some sort of destination. And so I'll talk about how to find those stations and also how to maximize them so that you're charged up everywhere you are going. And then finally, I'll talk about the area of charging that probably is most interesting to people that want to take long distance road trips in their car, which is DC fast charging. And again, there will be plenty of breaks throughout to answer questions. And so feel free to be sending questions in as we go, and I'll take regular breaks to answer them. So with that, I want to start off by talking about the two biggest questions that people usually have when they're considering an electric vehicle, which is how far can the car go on a single charge, and how fast can the car charge? Those are two really practical questions, and really important to help you consider what vehicle you want to get, and also, how to integrate it into your lifestyle. So when we're talking about how far the car can go on a single charge, it is affected by a couple of factors. The first is the size of the battery. That should seem pretty obvious. If you have a larger battery, it can store more energy, and so you can go farther on a single charge than you can with a car on a smaller battery. So in general, larger battery means more miles on 100% charge. But the other factor that influences how far you can go is efficiency. So efficiency describes how good the car is at converting the energy stored in the battery to miles driven. So this is something you've probably noticed with gas-powered cars as well, is that larger vehicles tend to be less efficient because they're heavier, and they tend to be taller as well. So that same principle applies to electric cars. Smaller cars will be better at converting the energy stored in the battery into miles driven, whereas larger cars will need more energy per mile. One difference that I want to note is that if you drive a gas-powered car, you might know that it's more efficient driving at faster speeds or highway speeds, whereas electric cars tend to be the opposite. They're much more efficient driving at lower speeds, like 25, 30, 40 miles per hour compared to those higher speeds. So you can get more efficiency out of your car by according to the way that you drive. And weather actually is a really big factor in determining how many miles your car will go on a single charge. If it's colder, electric cars have been known to decrease by range by about 30%, whereas when it's nice outside, let's say 60, 70 degrees, you'll actually get way more miles than the EPA estimated range that you'll see advertised as you're comparing different car models. So that's something to keep in mind as well, especially here in New England, where we tend to suffer from very, very cold winters. But this is a charging webinar. And so what I want to focus on is the charging piece. How fast can you charge and what affects that? So the first thing is the power source, which is how much power is available coming from wherever you're plugging into. Some people, including myself, have been known to charge their electric vehicles just plugging in the car with the charging cable that comes when you purchase the vehicle into a regular household outlet. So that's exactly like charging a smartphone. But of course, those kinds of outlets only deliver so much power. And so there are other opportunities to increase the voltage of your power source, and that'll increase how fast you're charging. But the other limitation that influences how fast you'll be able to charge is what's called the onboard charger, which is inside the vehicle itself. And so what that does is it converts the power coming from the outlet or power source from AC to DC, which is what is stored in the vehicle. And so every vehicle has an onboard charger that is basically like a maximum of how quickly it can charge. And so usually we'll talk a little bit more about what that means for level 2 charging, but that is a major factor. And then finally, weather is a big component of how fast you can charge as well. People will notice that in the cold weather, you'll charge a little bit more slowly. When it's warm out, you'll be able to charge faster. And weather is actually the one factor that affects both how far you can go and how fast you can charge. So that'll be something to keep in mind if you are often traveling in the cold weather months. So I mentioned that I've been known to charge using just a regular household outlet. That's what's called level 1 charging, and lots of people utilize this type of charging because it's really easy. You don't need any specialized equipment. The car comes with a cable that you can plug into a regular outlet. So if you park in a garage or somewhere close to an outlet, then you always have a spot to charge. And as I mentioned, it's exactly like charging a smartphone. It's very safe, and it's accessible to a lot of people. But the problem is household outlets don't deliver a lot of power. And so typically with this style of charging, you can only get about 4 miles of range per hour that you spend charging. In reality, that range is closer to 2 miles per hour to 6 miles per hour, depending on what the temperature is. But I found that 4 miles of range per hour of charging is a good kind of average number for most of the year. I also want to point out that there's 2 types of ports that can be used for this kind of charging. The first one is the J1772 port. That's actually what the picture looks like. That's what's in the vehicle. And so those are built into every electric vehicle you can buy. So there is a fair amount of standardization here. And so you won't have to worry about like which plugs match with which ports. The exception to that, of course, is Tesla. Tesla has its own standardized set of ports. And so if you drive a Tesla, then you might have to use an adapter to use other types of charging cables that are standardized for everyone else. But for the most part, it's universal and pretty easy to use. And I also want to emphasize, I know 4 miles of range per hour of charging seems really slow, but most people are not sitting there waiting for their car to charge in the same way that you sit there waiting for gas to be pumped into your vehicle. The best way to utilize level 1 or trickle charging is when your car is going to be sitting in one place for a really long time as you're going off and doing something else. So this style of charging is really popular among people who are able to keep their car plugged in, 8 to 10 hours overnight or longer, because in the aggregate, the car sitting there and charging, it'll put a lot of energy into the battery without you having to, sit there and wait. So this is a really common way that people tend to charge. But obviously, that speed of charging won't work for everyone, especially if you drive more than about 40 miles a day, which is what you can probably expect to get back in your vehicle when you spend a night charging at level 1 speed. And so level 2 charging is a way to make charging much faster, and it makes driving an EV much more convenient and practical for people who are driving those longer distances on a daily basis. Or even if you just want a little bit of security, right? So in an emergency, if you want to be able to charge up more quickly, then a level 2 charging station is very helpful. The level 2 charging stations use the exact same type of ports as level 1. So you have that unique Tesla port, and then the J1772, which is standardized for everyone else. And so this style of charging is much faster than what we see with the regular household outlet because it requires an outlet with higher voltage. So it's about a 220 volt outlet that's required, which is the same type of outlet that you would plug a washer or dryer into. So you're able to pull more power from the source because it has a higher voltage. But what's also needed in order to charge at level 2 is a specialized charging station. These charging stations can be as simple as a circuit breaker with a plug. And all it's meant to do is just make sure that with the higher power that's being delivered, that it's being done safely. So the simple models are just basically circuit breakers that you plug in to the outlet on one side and plug into the car on the other side. And the more specialized models can do fancy things like connect to Wi-Fi, manage your charging for you so that you can stop and start at a specific time, and do things like, monitor your charging rate from your smartphone. So there are lots of options that you can have there. And I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but you can get about 11 to 25 miles of range per hour that you spend charging. So that's significantly faster than what you would get with level 1. But 11 to 25 miles of range is still a pretty broad range. And so you might be wondering what exactly influences that. And the major factor is the vehicle itself. So I mentioned that every electric car has an onboard charger that manages how fast the car can charge. And so different models actually have different charging speeds at level 2. This chart will help you kind of navigate that and see what you might expect from some of the most popular models. You'll notice that the luxury Tesla vehicles tend to have the highest level 2 charging speeds. So you can get 25 to 30 miles of range per hour, depending on the car that you get. But most all electric vehicles tend to get about 22 to 24 miles of range per hour charging at level 2. And then if you drive a plug-in hybrid, which is a vehicle that has a small electric battery and then also a gas backup, those vehicles tend to charge a little bit more slowly because they're not solely relying on the battery for its powertrain. And so that's where you'll see the much lower rates of charging, where you'll get about 11 miles of range for every hour that you spend plugged in. But as a good rule of thumb, if you're driving a battery electric car, you'll get 22 to 24 miles per hour. Plug-in hybrids, you'll get half that. And then Tesla is just blowing everyone out of the water. And so if that's something that matters to you, you can use this table as a reference just to see what's available. But I should mention with all electric vehicles, you can charge completely from 0% to 100% using a level 2 charging station overnight. So that means even if you drive 200, 250 miles a day regularly, you can still drive an electric vehicle without a problem. You just probably will need a level 2 charging station. So just as an important clarification, because I've seen some confusion come from people about, like the charging station says it delivers this much power and it'll charge my car this quickly. But when I plug in, the car is not charging as fast as the charging station says. And that's because, you can only charge as quickly as how much power you're getting from the station, but also you can only charge as quickly as the car will accept power. So, if your car is only able to accept energy at a rate of 7.2 kilowatts, it's not going to charge faster than that, even if you plug it into a higher power station. So in this scenario where you're plugging a car into a station putting out 6.6 kilowatts, it'll only charge at a rate of 6.6 kilowatts, which is about 20 miles of range per hour. And then on the other hand, if you plug that same car into a station that delivers more power, it's not going to charge faster either because because the car can't charge as quickly as the station is giving out energy. So just something to keep in mind. You'll only ever be able to charge at your maximum rate for the car. And I am sure that there are plenty of questions coming into the chat, so I'm going to take a second to answer those. Yes, okay, and I should clarify, one person said the chat is not working, but I can send a question. That is the place where you can be sending questions and also communicating with me. It should come up as a questions box, and it won't say chat, but it looks like a chat from my end. So thank you for the clarification, and apologies for the confusion there. We have one question from Richard about if both the car and a computer are both within Wi-Fi distance, can the PC take the place of a smartphone for control of charging? That's a really good question. Yeah, so I'll go into this a little bit with the way that public charging networks work. But generally, if you are plugging your car into a charging station, there's like a smartphone app that comes along with the network. And so that's how you would pay for charging, and that's how you would monitor what's going on there. And so I believe if you wanted to like log into your account from a computer and then manage it that way, that would also work. But most people find the smartphone app to be the most convenient place to be doing that managing, just because it's more on the go, it's more mobile. But yes, anywhere with a Wi-Fi network, if the charger is a smart charger and connected to Wi-Fi, then you should be able to monitor it from any internet device. Joanna is asking, can you safely run a standard heavy-duty outdoor extension cord to charge a car if your parking location is too far from the outlet? Excellent question. So in general, the charging cables that come with vehicles are about 20 to 25 feet long. And so you have a good amount of wiggle room. And the advice that I've heard from electricians and experts is you should not plug that cable into an outlet because or into an extension cord, because as you extend the length of that extension cord, you have more power running through, and it tends to heat up faster. And so with the fact that you're drawing more power charging a car than you are, stringing up Christmas lights, for example, it's not safe to plug the charging cable into an extension cord. So if you do have an issue where you're trying to access an outlet to be able to plug in your car, I would maybe consult an electrician to see what the best way to provide electrical access for your car would be. But yeah, definitely do not recommend plugging into an extension cord. All right, I'll ask one more question. I see a couple coming in, and I think I'll be able to answer them in the next couple of sections, so I want to move on. But John is asking, with level 1 charging, does the charging cord use power if not plugged into the car? In other words, should I take it out of the outlet when not charging? Yeah, so what tends to happen with lithium-ion batteries in general is that you can kind of have it be at 100%, and if the device, whether it's a car or a laptop or a cell phone, is just sitting there for a very long period of time, it'll start to lose that charge that it's holding. It's just a natural part of what lithium-ion batteries do. And so if you're planning on, being away from your home for a long period of time, then I would recommend making sure that your car is unplugged before you leave for a long time, because then it will continue to draw power to make up for the fact that lithium-ion batteries tend to, lose that charge over time. But like overnight, for example, let's say, you want to charge to 100% and your car will be charged to 100% at 6 a.m. You don't have to run out at 6 a.m. to unplug to avoid drawing power, because the amount of power, from the moment that the car stops charging to, when you unplug and get ready to go, is very, very minimal, almost zero. So it depends on how long you expect to leave your car plugged in for. I would say longer than 3 days, a week, you would want to unplug it. But otherwise, don't worry about it. And with that, I'm going to move on, but thank you. Keep sending in your questions and we'll have plenty of time at the end, I'm sure. So this next section, we'll be talking about a little bit more about the process of installing charging at home or using public charging stations. And the clarification that I think can be helpful for people is that even though charging takes many more hours than refueling a car with gasoline, it can be much more convenient because you're not making detours to go to the gas station every week or 10 days or so. So instead of, waiting until your tank is nearly empty and then having to run to the gas station when you need more, it's more like, plugging in is easy because, you have an outlet right close to where your car parks overnight. And so you can plug in to replenish the miles that you drove that day, and then you're ready to go tomorrow. So it's more like charging a smartphone and kind of making sure it's close to being topped off as much as possible, rather than draining it down to 0 and then recharging it all the way to 100. And there are certainly other places to charge other than your home or wherever your car is parked overnight or most often. But most drivers find that charging at home is the easiest way to refuel an electric vehicle. And it can be very easy to decide, exactly what level of charging is best for you. So if you don't drive very many miles in a day, if you have a charging outlet that's easily accessible to your car that you can just plug in, lots of people find that level 1 charging doesn't require any additional equipment, and it's super easy to do without, investing very much in that level 2 charging station or making any electrical changes. However, if you drive more miles, and if you'd like the extra security of having a level 2 charging station, and if you own your home and you're able to make those kinds of electrical upgrades that you might need to install that higher voltage outlet, then a level 2 charging station is a good option for you. And Green Energy Consumers Alliance has a guide available to walk you through this decision-making process. So if you're having questions like, how do I know which level 1 or level 2 do I need? Like, how can I assess that for myself once I get an electric car? How do I pick out a charging station unit if I decide I want to go with level 2? Or, how do I find an electrician in order to be able to help me go through some of this work and see what's the best option for me? I really recommend checking this guide out. I want to mention that it typically costs around $1,200 in order to purchase a level 2 charging unit, and also to hire an electrician to actually install the thing. And so there is a cost consideration there as well. And so this guide will help you walk through that decision-making process so that you can go through the installation at lowest cost, and also to make sure that you make a decision that aligns with what you really need. As a quick anecdote, my parents recently bought a Chevy Bolt, I think back in January or February of this year. And I was talking to my dad through the options, and he drives about 60 miles a day as part of his commute. And he was saying, oh, well, of course we need a level 2 charging station. It'll be like, I drive way too many miles to be able to rely on level 1. And I just encouraged him to, give it a couple of weeks to see how he felt on a day-to-day basis. And he found that a level 2 charging station wasn't necessary at all. And he might still make that decision at some point in the future if his commute changes, or depending on, how secure he feels in the winter with a small decrease in range because of the cold weather. But you might be surprised to find that level 1 could support you better than you think. And of course, a major consideration for lots of people as they're thinking about what makes the most sense for them is the cost to charge at home. And in this regard, electric vehicles way beat out what you're probably paying for gasoline right now. So lots of people, when they're considering an electric car, are concerned about how much their electric bill will go up. But the important thing to remember is that your gasoline bills will go down by way more than your electric bills will increase. And so there are a couple of ways to kind of do the math to assess, based on how many miles you drive in a day, what your savings will be in a month or a year. But the eGallon tool is a helpful way to apples compare the cost of gasoline to the cost of electricity, which is what you see on the screen there. So I pulled this information from the Department of Energy from yesterday, and the most recent data that they have is from March 2021. So it's a couple of months out of date because the cost of gasoline changes all the time. But you'll see that if you're a driver in Massachusetts, you can expect to save about 80 cents per gallon compared to, or when you compare a gasoline-powered car with an electric car. And I should clarify that the eGallon is really a metric of the amount of energy that is contained in a gallon of gasoline. So, you know, if you have a very efficient electric car, which electric cars tend to be more efficient than gas-powered cars, you'll be saving more money because you're also just using less energy overall. And we have some good resources on our website to help calculate exactly how much you'll be saving according to the car that you have and some other factors. But the thing that I want to make really clear is that no matter what happens with gasoline prices, electricity will be cheaper. So I just switched to a screen grab of gas prices from December 2020. And that's when gas prices were really low, as they were for a large part of last year because demand for gasoline was really low. And even with rock bottom gas prices, electricity was still winning out as the cheaper fuel. And you'll notice that the cost of electricity didn't change at all in the last year. And that's because electricity prices are really regulated. And so, you know, you have that consistency that you just don't get with gasoline. So in addition to charging at home, which is the best option for most people, there's also lots of public level 2 charging options that can help you top up wherever you're going. So you might find these stations at work, at movie theaters, shopping centers, at your local seat of municipal government. Lots of town halls are installing them, and you know, hotels all over. There's a great resource to help you find all of these stations, and it's called PlugShare. So PlugShare essentially shows you a map of all the charging stations, and so you can see where the charging stations are in your area, but also you can see where the charging stations are in places that you like to travel to frequently. So let's say, you know, you'd like to visit your Aunt Beth in New York City. You can see what charging stations are along the way, and what you can use when you go on those longer trips. And the thing to remember too is, unlike gas stations, which have huge signs on the highway that's like, you know, Shell, come refuel here, charging stations tend to be a little bit more hidden. If you're not trained at spotting them, they might look more like a parking meter or something else than, you know, a charging station. And so the apps and the maps are really the best place to be able to locate those. Ooh, skip the slide there. And so as you're looking at this map of public charging stations, you'll find that there are different providers or networks that own and operate these stations. So there are lots of different ones in New England. The most popular one tends to be ChargePoint, but you'll also stumble across some other ones as well. And so each of these networks also have their own individual apps where you can go, open up an account, and then see what charging stations are in the network. So typically how you would work and use one of these networks is, you know, you find the station that you want to use, you see, oh, it's a ChargePoint station, I have an account with them, and then you can scan your phone right at the station that's connected to your credit card, and that will be what unlocks the station. So that's how you pay, it's how you monitor your energy consumption, it's how you know when your charging is done so that you can unplug and move your car so that someone else can charge. It has all the information that you need to be able to use the network. And they're also really good about telling you exactly where the station is in a parking lot. Sometimes parking lots or parking garages can be massive, and so you don't want to be driving around looking for one. And so the networks do a good job of telling you, like, yes, the charging station is on level 2, section F of the lot, and then you're like, okay, I know exactly where to go. So they're very useful. There are some non-networked stations that don't tend to show up on networked maps, but you can find those on the PlugShare resource as well. PlugShare is like the larger third-party neutral place where you can see all of the charging stations in an area, and then utilize the network from there. So the way that you might use this is, when you're driving somewhere. I drive an EV, and I've made it a habit that every time I go somewhere, I just check what's available in the area and see if there's a charging station nearby, because if so, I'm gonna want to plug into it if I'm driving there, right? So let's say you are taking a trip to the Roger Williams Park Zoo, which is in the Elmwood neighborhood of Providence. Before you go on your trip, you might just take a quick look at, are there charging stations around? And in the case of the zoo, there are. And so the PlugShare app will tell you when it's open, how much it costs, where it's located, what kind of network it's on. So in this case, the charging stations at the zoo are a ChargePoint. And then from there, you can switch to your ChargePoint app and say, like, oh yeah, it looks like these 2 plugs are available. You can see, where exactly they are in the lot, and answer some of the questions like, is someone already plugged in there? So they tend to be really helpful and provide a lot of information. And I mean, it's easy enough to just look at a map and see where the charging stations are if you're going somewhere new. Or lots of times I'm pleasantly surprised by, I pull up to a location and, oh, hey, there's a charging station here. Awesome. And you can just plug in that way. So that's something you just learn to do over time, especially if you rely on slower charging at home. It's nice to, have the luxury of using a faster charging station on the go. And so let's take another break for questions. Here's a great question from Bruce about installing charging at home. The question is, does level 2 charging depend on the 240 circuits power limit? And how does that correlate to my house amperage service? Mine is currently just 100 amps. Great question. Okay, so any electrician is qualified to install a 240 volt outlet. It's like one of the easiest things that an electrician can do, and that is, kind of just the port type that you're able to plug into. So that has to do with voltage, is how much kind of potential, electrical potential is coming from the outlet. The other thing that an electrician will typically look at if they're going to install an outlet that is going to draw a lot of power is current. Current is measured in amps, and it's basically how quickly electricity flows. Most houses being built today have a standard of 200 amp service, but lots of older houses in New England only have 100 amp service. And most electricians will recommend that you upgrade from 100 amps to 200 amps just to make sure that you have enough electricity flow going into your house. So that is something that your electrician can help you with. Having to upgrade your service definitely is a cost that will increase the total amount that you're paying for the installation. So you can expect to pay more than the $1,200 that tends to be the average. But depending on, what other plans you have for your house, that might be something you have to do anyway. So if you're ever thinking about installing solar, you would need to probably increase the current running into your home. If you ever are looking to install another very high power appliance, so let's say, like a new fancy induction burner for your kitchen, that might be something you would need as well. So I would recommend talking to an electrician and seeing what the cost would be, because 200 amp service is definitely recommended by most electricians. A question from Richard is asking, do all public charging stations require a smartphone to recharge, or can you use a credit card and some? How many? Yeah, so I would say, in my experience, since ChargePoint is the predominant charging network here in New England, and they utilize the smartphone app, there's no way to just swipe a credit card to be able to pay. I would find it really difficult to go about charging without a smartphone. However, I know that some DC fast charging stations, which I'll talk about in a little bit, can accept credit cards if you don't have the app on your phone. So it really depends. Some stations are also free. So for example, I recently traveled to Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut to watch a WNBA game, and was very pleasantly surprised to see free charging in the casino. But it was a non-networked station. And so I had a little bit more trouble finding the station inside of the huge parking complex there. But then, once I got there, it was just the charging cable that I could plug into my car. So no smartphone was needed there, and it was also free. So for the most part, I would say networked stations, you will need a smartphone to unlock. Otherwise, if it's just a non-networked plug, you should be able to plug in no problem. But the smartphone makes it a lot easier. One more question from Richard. Who pays for the free charging stations? That's a great question. So in the case of the casino, their goal is to try to get you to be there for as long as possible. So they're willing to offer the free charging as an amenity. Likewise, if you go to a charging station at a grocery store or some like a Walmart or a Target, some large commercial complex, then they're using the charging station to try and attract shoppers and beat out the competition. And so in that case, they're paying for the electricity to be able to attract business. In other situations, if it's free, it depends on whoever owns the station. So usually if you are at a public parking lot or some sort of destination, wherever the charging station is, that's who's paying for it. But unfortunately, a lot of them do charge some sort of fee to help pay for the cost of electricity. So it really just depends. And I should mention the cost of these free charging stations can vary as well. Some of them are done by the time that you spend plugged in. Other times it's the amount of energy you consume. So it really varies, and that's another reason that the apps are super handy, is because you can see 30 cents per kilowatt hour is more expensive than I'm used to paying. And so I don't really need the top up, so I'm gonna not plug into that station because it's more expensive than I care to pay for. So those apps will kind of help you assess whether it's worth it to plug in. I'll admit I almost always plug in if the charging station is free. So eventually, I think as more people get EVs, you'll see costs be more common to charge, just so that people who actually need to charge are able to get the stations. But yeah, there's definitely an abundance of free charging right now. I'll answer one more question from Paul before I move on to this last section, and then try to answer the rest of the questions from there. He asked, is there a good resource page for EV owners to see all the programs available now? Yeah, so Green Energy Consumers has on our website under the Drive Green section a whole bunch of resources related to everything you need to know about an electric vehicle. And so under our charging page, you'll be able to find some information about different charging programs that are available. And I actually have a slide coming up about that in just a few minutes, so you'll be able to reference that as well. But in general, your utility company is a great resource to see what's available in your area. But before I get there, I would love to talk a little bit about DC fast charging, because even though it's not the way that most people tend to charge on a daily basis, it is something that you need to be aware of if you are ever planning on taking a long distance road trip in your car. So I mentioned that the onboard charger is really the limiting factor in every electric vehicle that helps to keep track of how much energy is coming into the car, and that often is the limiting factor for how quickly you can charge. But with DC fast charging, the stations that are built out there in the public specifically to charge cars really, really fast are able to bypass that onboard charger, because they're outputting power in the DC format already. And so it doesn't need to be converted inside the car. So the energy is just going directly from the charging station to the battery pack, which means you can charge much faster. And there are 3 different charging ports that you need to be aware of. The first is the J1772 combo. This is really becoming the standard for most cars, but you'll notice it's the same port type as the regular J1772 that people use for level 1 and level 2 charging. And then right underneath it are 2 pins that allow for the DC fast charging. So in most cars like the Chevy Bolt, you'll only see 1 port, and it either has the kind of 2 DC fast charging pins or it doesn't. That's not a feature that you can add to a car after the fact, after you buy it. So if DC fast charging is something that you're interested in doing, make sure that you buy a car with that with those 2 pins, so that you're able to charge at those faster speeds. The other option that you'll see in cars like the Nissan Leaf or other Asian-made cars is the CHAdeMO port. That is phasing out in North America. There is an effort to keep things as standardized as much as possible. So vehicles will largely have the J1772 combo port for both level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. But some cars out in the wild now might have this additional CHAdeMO port that is meant solely for DC fast charging. So just something to be aware of, especially if you're buying a used vehicle. And then finally, Tesla has its different port that is, it just has 1 port, and it's the Tesla one. So the question you might be asking is, how much faster is fast charging? And it really depends on the power output of the station. And every car has a max limit as well. So the most common types of fast charging stations that I tend to see out and about are 25 kilowatts and 50 kilowatts, which will give you about 45 miles or 90 miles in 30 minutes of charging, depending on lots of other factors. So more than any other charging type, DC fast charging is really dependent on what the temperature is, how much energy your car had when you plugged into it. So you'll notice a difference whether you plug in at 10% or 80%. You'll notice a difference depending on how much total battery storage capacity you have in your car. Cars with larger batteries tend to have more cushion to be able to charge faster for a larger amount of time, and also some other factors. So these are the numbers that you see in the chart there are generalized estimates, and that should give you a decent idea of what to expect. But every charging station or every charging session will be different according to those factors. And it really depends on the type of vehicle that you're driving as well. So a car like the Chevy Bolt, the newest one, can fast charge at a rate of 55 kilowatts, which will get you from 0% to 80% in about 70 minutes, whereas the newest Nissan Leaf can charge about twice as fast, even though it doesn't have as many, as long of a driving range. So this chart can help you decide what exactly is the best vehicle for you according to, what is the driving range that you really want, and also how fast you want to charge when you're traveling. The Kia Niro and the Hyundai Kona are a good middle ground for both of those factors. They have pretty long driving ranges, and also can charge reasonably fast. But again, it really depends on, all of those other factors that you might talk about. But the important thing to remember here is that this charging speed is what will enable you to take much longer road trips, and to, travel perhaps hundreds of miles in a day without having to wait around 8 hours to get your car charged at a level 2 speed. Most people don't use these DC fast chargers on a regular basis, but they can be handy in a pinch. And just an example of what a typical charging station might, or a charging session might look like. You'll always see the fastest rate of charging in the first 30 minutes that you're plugged in. So for a Chevy Bolt, if you plug it in at 5%, it'll get about 98 miles in the first 30 minutes. In the next 30 minutes, it'll slow down a tiny bit. And as it approaches that 80% mark, it'll slow down significantly. So most people find that, it's worth it just to plug in for an hour to get most of the way there, 80%, 75%, and then carry on and just look for the next DC fast charging station on their journey. And it's a big reason why lots of people tend to plan out exactly where their next charging stop will be and how long they're going to charge in that time. Because if you're taking a very long trip, then you only really need to get to the next charging station, and so it doesn't make sense to wait that extra hour for just 50 miles in that last little segment there. And I would recommend, there's a tool called a Better Route Planner that can help you plan these longer trips. And so if it is something that you're concerned about, that is a great resource to help you map out the charging stations and tell you exactly how long you should be there for. And Tesla fanatics will say that Tesla will do all of that for you so that you can see it up on the screen. I don't know very much about that, but I have heard it be a very useful feature on those longer trips. So something to consider as well. And I do want to get to the last couple of slides, but I want to emphasize, unless you are regularly taking road trips, the DC fast charging network is not something that you'll use on a daily basis. Most EV drivers tend not to use it at all, especially if they have another car that they can use to take on those longer trips. But there are some great blogs that Green Energy Consumers members have written about their experience utilizing the fast charging network on these trips. So the best way to learn about it is really just to read those experiences and to see what people have to say about using the network. But it is building out all of the time. It's getting much better thanks to investment from utility companies. And speaking of utility companies, there are a couple of utility programs that can help you save money by charging during off-peak times when you're at home. These are a couple of the options depending on whether you're an Eversource customer or a National Grid customer. And there are more charging programs coming. Green Energy Consumers has been working hard to make sure that these programs continue and scale up so that EV drivers can save as much money as possible by charging during the nighttime, which is also the best time for the overall electrical system. So if you live in Eversource or National Grid territory, I encourage you to regularly check out what they're offering, or just read our emails about our Drive Green program, and we'll be able to update you on when new programs become available. But here's a quick little sneak peek of what's out there. And I will do my best to answer all the questions that are left in this time, but I do just want to make a quick plug for another webinar coming up, specifically related to the issues that an apartment or condo dweller might face if they're trying to get an electric vehicle and charge at home. It's much harder to charge at home if you are not able to just park in your garage and make changes to your electrical system. And so this upcoming webinar on August 24th will help walk you through some strategies to convince your property owner or condo association that charging stations are something that you should prioritize. And so I'll quickly send the RSVP link in the chat. Yeah, I'll send the RSVP link in the chat and stop screen sharing so that I can do that, but happy to answer the last couple of questions that we have coming in. Thank you to Diane, who recognized the quick plug pun. I did not intend to say that, but I'm glad you caught that. I do love a good pun. Here's a great question from Eileen. What is the BMS lithium-ion battery that was pictured in the previous slide showing fast charging? Do you need a specialized battery for fast charging? Great question. I kind of sped through that slide because I realized I was running out of time. But BMS stands for Battery Management System. So it's not a specialized part of the battery. It's a built-in component that comes with every electric car. And so what that does is make sure that at any moment in time when the car is charging, it is doing so in an optimal way to make sure that the health of the battery is extended, and so that whatever charging speed is being used, it's best for the battery itself. So it's not a specialized part of the battery. It's not something you need to request or ask about. It's just the internal computer kind of making decisions about how quickly it should charge at any given time. And that's what changes how quickly the car will charge when it's fast charging for a long period of time. But that is very techy and not something I know too much about, other than it does a good job in extending the life of the car overall. Another question from James. Is it okay to charge a car when it's almost fully charged, or is it better to wait until it's almost empty of charge? Yeah, that is a great question. I would say in general, most EV drivers find that it's most convenient to just top off and make sure that, you know, they always have a good amount of charge, especially if you're charging at level 1. You want to be able to kind of plug in after a full day's driving to replenish the energy that you used in that day. I would say the thing that you want to avoid as much as possible is draining down to 0 and plugging in all the way to 100% again. It's why you know, most people don't use DC fast charging on a daily basis, because it kind of encourages you to deplete the battery to 0 and then get it up to 100% again. So as long as you're not stressing the battery in that way, then whatever you need to do in order to make sure that you have enough charge for the trips that you are planning on is a-okay. And if you want to be very kind of meticulous about it, then, you know, topping out at around 80% can be helpful. There are ways to assign that in the car so that it never charges beyond 80%. So that's an option that you have, but it's definitely not necessary. And let me just take a moment to send this registration link for the August 24th webinar in the chat so that I don't forget, because it is just about noon. So I'll ask one more question before I release you to lunch. Here's a question from Dee Dee. How long will batteries last? Can you replace them, and at what cost? Great question. You can expect the battery in your car to last as long as the car itself, which means it is more likely that if you buy a brand new EV today, that the other components in the car, the bottom, like rusting out, is more likely to happen before the battery gives out on you. So the limiting factor in the life of the car will really be all the mechanical components, like, you know, the wheels and all that stuff, rather than the battery itself. All electric cars are sold with an 8-year or 100,000-mile warranty. So if something were to happen to the battery because of a factory defect, the automaker would replace the battery free of charge to you. But the process of doing that, because the battery is the most expensive part of an electric car, would be about $12,000 to the automaker to, you know, get a new battery and actually put it in there. But that is not a cost that will be borne onto you as the driver. And most people are finding that their electric cars are extremely, extremely reliable in the long run, more reliable than gas-powered cars, which have hundreds of moving parts and tend to need more repairs over their lifetime than electric cars. And so if you want to learn more about that, I encourage you to check out the Green Energy Consumers website. We have all of that information under the maintenance section. If you go to Drive Green and then click Learn About Electric Cars, you'll be able to check more into that for yourself. But that does conclude our time for the webinar today. I want to thank you all for joining me. I know we covered a lot of material in this hour, but feel free to use the Drive Green website as a resource to continue to learn about electric cars. And if there are any questions that are still lingering and that I didn't get to today, I just shared my email in the chat, so feel free to just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as possible to answer that question. But thanks again for your time this afternoon, and I wish you all a good lunch.